Well, we've always, in our local, we've always had meetings, and we come up with negotiating commission through committees, and not just the committees, but negotiating positions through meetings, and they're fairly well attended. And people want all sorts of things. And we have a negotiating committee, and that's the one part of the naming people that I always kept. I wanted to determine who was on the negotiating committee. And we put all sorts of kinds of people in the committee. And we had a little routine. We said to them, you can say whatever you want in caucusing. If you speak out of turn in negotiations, we're going to come after you because we can't have that. So we had really people on negotiating committees that weren't particularly fond of the union, but they had a point of view, and it was an important point of view, and they represented people. That's how it goes. You have to be willing to do that. So negotiations take forever. We have a state system that's terrible, really. It's not as bad as South Carolina, but it's not great because the governor presents the parameters for the raises, then we negotiate with the Board of Trustees who are controlled by the governor, then it goes to the governor then has to submit it for funding to the legislature, and often the governor has not submitted a contract that he or she and their people negotiated, and then it goes to the legislature can vote for the appropriation or not, it goes back to the governor, and the governor can veto it. So it really comes down to publicity and taking union action and picketing and all that sort of stuff, which we do fairly well, I think, in terms of higher ed. It's not easy. Well, it's sort of patchy, right? The unions, the faculty higher ed unions are on the East Coast and on the West Coast, and then around Chicago. There's very few elsewhere. There's some branches of the University of Illinois, for example, various campuses of the University of Illinois, and as I said, mainly it's on the West Coast and East Coast. And the salaries in those places are higher, and people have more to say. They have more control over their work process in those areas. The AFT was founded by a local of primary school teachers in Chicago and high school teachers in New York, and then ultimately the University of New York and the University of New York City, City University of New York, were the main locals for higher ed, and they go back a long way. We go back a very long way. I think we had the first higher ed contract in 1970. So we go back as a local a long way. So I think nationally, I think the AFT leadership is very politically organized. The NEA is also as well. I've come to appreciate the NEA. The NEA is a staff-driven system, which I used to think was a bad thing. I'm not so sure it's a bad thing anymore, especially when it becomes more and more difficult to involve members in doing the work of the union. Well, we have a seniority clause, which is unusual. We negotiated that. We got it through. I don't know how we got it through. The seniority clause is also seen as a problem by some faculty, but the idea is that they have to fire the most recent hires first, and they don't want to do that. So we've never had to invoke it. And in order for the seniority clause to kick in, they have to show us the books and so on, so they don't want to do that either. So the seniority clause has forced university administration to find the money rather than lay people off. We picketed the Democratic State Convention, and that was one of our demands at the time, and we got that through somehow. I didn't think the administration thought it was a big deal, but they then tried to change it. They're never going to change it. So it's a very important point. I mean, there's big problems coming due to right-to-work laws coming for public employees. So it's a Supreme Court decision, which is going to be a tough battle. University administrators get credit for eliminating stuff. That's how that works. They're doing new initiatives. It's all idiotic, but that's how they're rewarded. So there are very many instances where they tried to eliminate parts of things on the campus, departments, for example. So we have pretty strong language about that, and they weren't able to do that. They had to go through the committee structure. And in some cases, we had big votes. We had votes about merging departments or moving departments in other colleges, but we looked at that as a union vote. And they voted. And sometimes they voted to eliminate departments, and sometimes they voted to move departments between colleges. And there was tough decisions, but it was a vote. And the interesting thing about a vote is that once people vote, they accept the result. Right? If somebody says, okay, we're going to do this, and others say, no, we're not going to do that. But once there's a vote of the local, people tend to accept it, and it works for the administrators. In fact, we convinced some of our chancellors that let this go through the structure that we have, rather than you try to do it, because you're never going to succeed, because they're going to fight you tooth and nail. So the only possible chance you have of succeeding is going through the negotiated structure of committees. We've always, our union, the Faculty Federation, Faculty and Staff Union, as in all higher ed unions, locals, chapters, whatever they call them, in the NEA, for example, always have relied on K-12 members. And we're always a small number. So within the AFT, higher ed is probably something like 10%. Within the NEA is probably 5%. So the vast majority of members in teachers' unions are K-12 teachers. And we rely on K-12 teachers, and we rely on the leadership of the union to recognize that higher ed is an important component. And so we really receive a disproportionate amount of support from the national unions, national teachers unions. And there's reasons for that, right? Because we're teaching teachers. So if you have a local faculty union on a campus, then the teachers that come out of that, graduates that come out of those schools, are more likely to be active in the teachers' unions at their schools. So it sort of hangs together, and there's problems between teachers. Higher ed professors tend to blame teachers for every problem they encounter with students. So there's problems, there's tension between those groups. But we really have to work together. We have to support K-12, and they have to support us. Otherwise, we're done for. We organize the part-timers, we organize the graduate employees, we organize all the time in ESU. We're bringing in the new people. The regular faculty fought. The substantial group of the regular faculty, the tenure track faculty, fought against organizing part-timers on the idea that if they're paid less, I'll be paid more. Contract negotiations are a legal system. They're not the best legal system, but they're a legal system. It doesn't say that you have to come to agreement. It just says, the law says that the union and the administration has to negotiate. So it's getting harder and harder. We have agency fee. I think all the unions on campus have agency fee regulations. So those are going to be difficult to maintain if it changes in the Supreme Court. The union started with about 30% membership, and then we negotiated an agency fee, and we went to 95, and we're probably 98% membership.
What is an agency fee?
An agency fee means that people who are in the bargaining unit, whether they belong to the union or not, have to pay a share of union costs in negotiations. And the union costs typically in negotiations are 80-90% of the dues. So the argument is, you're paying this, you should have a say, even though agency fee members have a say in negotiations. So it's a complicated system. But most people join because they're paying some large portion of the dues anyway, and so they join. We've had a couple of holdouts. I think there's maybe 10 people now There's nobody in most of the unions, and among faculty, and there may be 10 or so. I'm not sure the exact number. So that really helps. It makes a big difference to have that. I don't think we'd go back to 30% no matter what. But we might go back to 50% or 60%, which is a problem. The campus, UMass Dartmouth, was created by union members in the textile workers unions in the turn of the century. And in fact, there was the head of the Mule Spinners Union, which is a textile group, was on the board of trustees for 50 years for the various names that our campus has gone through. So we have that long tradition. We have a long-term connection with the local labor council going back 120 years. So that helps. That helps. But it's going to be a struggle. And we really need new, younger leaders. You're not going to be protected by the political system. People don't like college professors. Flat out. If they were a student, they certainly don't like college professors. So you need some sort of protection of law or protection of a contract. Once you're fighting for crumbs, you're going to lose. And that's how that goes. And the leadership recognizes that. But I think that teachers and college faculty and staff don't always understand that. And that becomes a really big issue. We've had very, very good connections with, it's called the paraprofessionals, like teachers' aides. I'm not sure why that is, but we've always had good relations with them. We have pretty good relations with the K-12 teachers in big cities because they tend to be more politically aware than locals in suburban schools who aren't really aware of the political system as much, I think. So we have pretty good connections because the K-12 locals in the big cities want higher ed people, and we, of course, want them to support us. So we see a symbiotic relationship. Without that, we'd be done for. And the K-12 teachers would be done for. I mean, you really can't exist by yourself.